A plastic sandwich bag of old costume jewelry sitting in a moving box since before you were born can hold a piece worth thousands of dollars. That exact same bag, priced at $2 on a folding table, because nobody bothered to flip anything over, can end up quietly padding a stranger's bank account instead of yours. The gap between those two outcomes has almost nothing to do with how big the stones look or how much a piece sparkles under a lamp. It comes down to one small detail almost everybody walks straight past without ever noticing they walked past it. A tiny name pressed into the metal on the back. 7 brands, 1 habit. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which names to search for in your own jewelry, which pieces look so convincingly cheap that most people never give them a second glance, and roughly what each one is actually worth in today's market. Before we get into the list, build one single habit right now, because everything in this video rests on it. Turn the piece over, read the back. That is the entire secret hiding underneath nearly a century of so-called costume jewelry. A beautiful-looking brooch with nothing stamped anywhere on it is usually worth a handful of dollars, no matter how good it looks in the light. That exact same brooch, same design, same year, same materials, but carrying the right name pressed into the metal can be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars to the right buyer. Nobody teaches you this, and nobody in the modern retail jewelry business has any reason to. New jewelry stores make their money selling you this season's collection, not telling you the box in your closet might already be worth more than anything sitting in their display case. And this is not some tiny hobby corner of the collectibles world that only a handful of obsessive people care about. Vintage costume jewelry has quietly become one of the fastest climbing categories in the entire collectibles market over the past several years, driven largely by buyers who watched their own mothers and grandmothers wear these exact pieces and now have the money and the motivation to chase them down at auction. That rising demand is precisely why prices on some of these names have jumped so sharply in such a short window, and why a bag that might have sold for a few dollars a decade ago can be worth real money today. So we're going to do this the same way I do it at the table, starting with the name easiest to dismiss as worthless, and working our way up to the brand that has fooled more estate sale buyers in this country than any other single name on this list. Let me be honest with you before we get started, the same way I would be honest with a client sitting across the table from me. Not everything with a signature on the back is worth chasing. And I am not going to pretend every dusty pin in your closet is secretly a fortune waiting to be discovered. But I have watched entire estates get sold off in a single afternoon, boxed up and hauled away for almost nothing, simply because nobody in the family knew that a handful of the names inside that box were worth actively hunting for. That is the gap this video is built to close. Number 7, Kramer of New York. Kramer made rhinestone jewelry through the 1940s, 50s, and into the 60s in enormous volume, which is precisely why so many pieces get walked past. People assume that anything made in that kind of quantity has to be common, and common gets translated in most people's heads into worthless, when the two things are simply not the same. Kramer built a real reputation for using unusually large, high-quality Austrian crystal in bold, layered designs, and the company was trusted enough in its day to produce jewelry sold under licensing arrangements tied to other well-known fashion names. What makes Kramer sneaky is the sheer scale of the pieces. Big, dramatic bib necklaces and matching earring sets, stacked with faceted crystal in unusual colors like aurora borealis pink and deep amethyst, that most people today assume must be recent costume jewelry from a mall kiosk rather than something 70 years old. A standard signed Kramer brooch or clip earring set typically sells in the $50 to $90 range, but a complete, well-matched parure in an unusual color, with every stone intact and the original clasp still functioning, has sold at specialty auction for well over $900. The lesson from Kramer is simple, and it is going to repeat itself all the way through this list. High production numbers do not equal low value. They just mean you have to look harder to find the specific pieces worth chasing. I have personally watched a Kramer bib necklace get passed over 3 times at the same estate sale, sitting in a bowl of mismatched clip earrings, before someone finally turned it over and realized what they were looking at. Number 6, Bucher. Marcel Bucher trained as a model maker at Cartier in Paris before moving to New York and starting his own house in the early 1930s, and that training shows in almost everything the company ever produced. Bucher pieces were built with a level of sculptural realism most costume jewelry houses never attempted. Birds with individually articulated feathers, fish with scales that catch light at different angles, insects with wings set at a genuine angle rather than flat against the body. Early pieces are marked with a small stylized cat symbol next to the initials MB, which later became a full Bucher script signature alongside a style number unique to each design. A style number is worth knowing because collectors use it to identify exact production runs, and pieces with rarer numbers command a real premium over more common ones from the same era. A typical signed Bucher figural brooch sells in the $100 to $250 range, And the elaborate enameled birds and fish with the earliest CAT and MB mark have sold for well over $1,200 at dedicated sales. If you have ever picked up a piece and thought it looked too finely sculpted to be simple costume jewelry, that instinct was very likely correct, and it is worth checking the back before you decide otherwise. Bucher pieces also tend to have noticeably heavier pinbacks than competing brands, a small detail left over from Marcel Boucher's fine jewelry training, and that extra weight alone is often the first clue something is worth a closer look. Number 5. Weiss. Albert Weiss worked for Corot before starting his own company in the 1940s, and he built his entire reputation on one specific advantage. He used higher quality. More brilliant rhinestones than almost anyone else working in the same price category at the time. Weiss pieces are noticeably heavier in the hand than comparable brooches from competing houses, because the company set its stones in thicker, more substantial metal rather than thin stamped sheet. The most recognizable Weiss design is a series of holiday and floral pieces set almost entirely in a rich, saturated red or a deep emerald green crystal. With the stones so tightly packed that almost no metal shows through the front of the piece at all, look on the back for Weiss stamped in block capital letters, sometimes accompanied by a small copyright symbol on later pieces. A standard signed Weiss brooch in good condition sells in the $80 to $150 range, and the fully pavé holiday pieces, especially the poinsettia and holly designs from the 1950s, have sold for $400 to $900 when the stones are still bright and none are missing. Weiss is the brand most likely to be mistaken for a modern reproduction, because the stones still throw so much light after 70 years that people assume the piece simply cannot be that old. It is also one of the more commonly reproduced names on this list precisely because of that brightness. So a piece that feels unusually thin or light for its size is worth a second look before you trust the signature alone. Number 4. Netty Rosenstein. Here is where the money starts getting serious, and here is a name almost nobody watching this has ever heard, which is exactly why it belongs on this list. Rosenstein was first a respected fashion designer, dressing first ladies and society women through the 1930s and 40s, and her jewelry line began the same way Eisenberg's did, as decoration meant to accompany a dress rather than as the actual product. Her jewelry division eventually became its own serious business, known for restrained, elegant designs in sterling silver with vermeil gold plating, set with finely faceted rhinestones cut to a genuinely higher standard than most of her costume jewelry contemporaries. Look for Netty Rosenstein stamped in full, in script, sometimes with sterling alongside it on pieces from the war years when base metal was restricted for military use. Those sterling-marked pieces are the ones to hunt hardest for, because the window in which they were produced was short. A signed Netty Rosenstein brooch typically sells in the $150 to $300 range, and the sterling vermeil pieces with unusual figural designs, a particular series of enameled fruit brooches especially, have sold for well over $1,500 at auction. If a piece in your box feels unusually restrained and elegant compared to everything around it, almost too tasteful to be costume jewelry, that is exactly the kind of piece worth checking first. Rosenstein rarely repeated designs across large production runs the way bigger houses did, which is part of why so many of her pieces feel one of a kind even decades later, and it is part of why so few people recognize the name when they finally do turn one over. Number 3. Mer Brothers and Jas. This is where construction becomes the entire story, because Mer pieces were built like fine jewelry even though they were made from base metal and glass. The company insisted on individually pronged stone settings rather than glued flat mounts, and the metalwork underneath its rhinestones is sculpted with genuine depth, ridges, leaves, and shells that were hand-finished rather than simply stamped flat. Turn a piece over and run a finger along the underside. You should be able to feel actual dimension in the metal itself, not just a smooth, flat plate with stones glued on top. Mer's earlier pieces are signed simply Mer, while the later line, run by the same family, carries the name Jas. A standard signed Mer or Jas brooch sells in the $150 to $350 range, and the boldest sculptural designs, particularly a series of jeweled shell and coral motif pieces from the late 1940s, have sold for over $2,000 in excellent condition. If you own anything with real sculpted depth to the metal rather than a flat stamped front, that is your cue to check the signature before it goes anywhere near a donation box. Even unsigned Mer pieces, which do exist from the company's earliest years, can often be identified purely from that pronged, sculpted construction alone, which is exactly the kind of detail a folding table buyer never bothers to check. Number 2. Panetta. If Mer teaches you that construction can carry the value even without a famous name attached, Panetta pushes that lesson to its extreme, because most people have genuinely never heard of it, despite the fact that specialists consider it among the very finest costume jewelry ever produced in America. Panetta was founded by former fine jewelers who applied real jewelry techniques, invisible settings, channel set baguette stones sitting flush against one another with no visible metal between them, to costume pieces using rhinestones instead of diamonds. The result looks so convincingly like genuine platinum and diamond jewelry that pieces have reportedly been mistaken for the real thing by people who should have known better. Look for Panetta stamped in a distinctive rounded script, and look closely at how the stones sit against one another, because that seamless channel setting is nearly impossible to fake convincingly and is the single clearest signal you're holding something significant. A signed Panetta bracelet or brooch in good condition regularly sells in the $300 to $600 range, and the full channel set parures, necklace, bracelet, and earrings together in their original fitted box have sold for over $3,000 at specialist auctions. Panetta is, quite simply, the brand built specifically to be mistaken for the real thing, and most people who own a piece have absolutely no idea what they're actually looking at. I have had clients bring in a Panetta bracelet convinced it was a piece of real family diamond jewelry that needed insuring, and in a strange way, they were not entirely wrong about how it was made, just wrong about the stones sitting inside it. And number one, the name at the very top of this list, Sinner. Most people have walked past a Sinner piece in an estate sale bin and assumed it was simply an unusually well-made modern costume brooch, because that is exactly the gap this brand lives inside. Sinner started as a fine jewelry house, making real gold and platinum pieces, before the Depression forced the company to pivot into costume jewelry in order to survive, and it brought every bit of that fine jewelry training directly into the new line. The company used old fine jewelry casting molds originally built for genuine gemstones, simply substituting high-quality rhinestones and glass into settings engineered for diamonds and emeralds, which is why Sinner pieces sit and move on the body with a weight and precision almost no other costume house ever matched. Look on the back for Sinner, stamped in clean block letters, and pay close attention to the clasp mechanism specifically. Because Sinner used the same trombone clasps and box catches found on genuine fine jewelry of the same era, rather than the cheaper spring clasps most costume competitors relied on. A clean-signed Sinner brooch regularly sells in the $200 to $400 range, and specific figural designs. A series of enameled flamingo and swan brooches from the 1950s especially have sold for well over $4,000 at auction when condition is strong. Of everything on this list, Sinner is the name most likely to get dismissed by someone who has never once turned the piece over to actually look. The company is also still in operation today under later ownership, which confuses people further, since a modern signer tag can sit in the very same drawer as a genuine mid-century piece, and only the back of each one will actually tell you which is which. So, what actually connects all 7 of these names? Every single one of them made jewelry engineered to imitate something more expensive than it technically was. Glass imitating emerald, plated base metal imitating gold, rhinestone imitating diamond. And that exact quality is what makes every one of them so easy to dismiss today. If a piece looks like an imitation, most people stop right there and assume the story is finished. But looking convincingly like the real thing was the entire design goal for every single brand on this list, and decades later, that same imitation, done well by genuinely skilled hands, is worth real money to collectors who know precisely what they are looking at. Run back through those 7 names for a moment and notice the pattern in exactly how each one hides from an untrained eye. Kramer hides behind sheer production volume. Bucher hides behind a tiny cat symbol most people have never learned to look for. Weiss hides behind stones so bright people assume the piece has to be modern. Netty Rosenstein hides behind a name most people have simply never encountered in their lives. Mazer hides behind dimension and metalwork that nobody thinks to run a finger across. Panetta hides behind being mistaken for the genuine platinum and diamond piece it was built to imitate. And Sinner hides behind fine jewelry construction wrapped around costume materials. Every single one of them is hiding for a slightly different reason, and every single one of them is found using exactly the same method. Now let me be completely honest with you, because that honesty is the entire reason this channel works the way it does. Not every piece from these 7 brands is worth a fortune, and it would be dishonest to let you walk away believing otherwise. Condition changes everything about the final number. Missing stones, cloudy plating, and a snapped clasp can cut a piece's value down to a small fraction of what a clean, complete example brings at the same sale. Rarity matters just as much as the name itself. A common, mass-produced design, even from the most prestigious house on this entire list, may still only be worth a modest sum if thousands of the exact same piece were originally made, and a good number of them survived. And on the more valuable names especially, signatures have occasionally been added to lesser pieces after the fact, so a mark alone should never be the very last word. If you genuinely believe you are holding something significant, it is worth having an independent appraiser confirm the details before you try to sell anything. But here's the math that makes this worth 30 seconds of your evening regardless. Turning a piece over and reading the back costs you absolutely nothing. No appointment, no fee, no specialist training, just a decent lamp and a closer look than you have ever bothered to give it before. Selling a genuine Panetta bracelet or a real Sinner flamingo brooch for $2 at a driveway sale because nobody thought to check costs you everything that piece was actually worth, permanently, the moment it leaves your hands. Oh, so before anything else from that bag or that box goes into a donation pile, a scrap tray or a $5 folding table in somebody else's driveway, take a few minutes and actually flip every single piece over and read exactly what is stamped into the back. Set aside anything carrying one of these 7 names, even if the stones look dull or a clasp feels loose, because condition can often be gently restored while a genuine signature never can be manufactured after the fact. Tell me down in the comments which of these 7 names you found sitting in your own jewelry box, and describe the piece if you can, because I genuinely read every single one of these comments. And whatever else you do this week, do not sell a single piece out of that box until you have checked.